Welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I am your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on the program today, the top 20 prospects the Texans could take in the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft after the NFL Combine. All the testing's done. We're going to tell you who's rising up draft boards and who flunked in Indianapolis on today's show. Before we get going, though, we are on the road to 30,000 subs by the NFL Draft, and I was talking to my bosses here at Chat Sports, and I said, hey, how can we possibly go live for part of the NFL Draft here on the Texans channel? I want to go live for our picks. I want to be live reacting with all you Texans fans out there. They said, hey, we can get to 30K subs by the NFL Draft. We'll talk about it. So help me go live here on the channel. Let's get to 30,000 subs. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It's 100% free. If you don't like it in a week, hey, all you have to do is unsubscribe. No skin off your back. It's 100% free. But let me prove to you why this is the #1 Texans channel here on YouTube. Now, I'm going to start off by saying, guys, who I don't think will make it to 25. You know, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Will Campbell, Teteroa McMillan, Jalen Walker, Armin Mimbu, which it sucks. He had a great combine. I really think he's top 15 pick now. Tyler Warren, Ashton Jeanty, Jahdae Barron, going along with some other guys who I don't think make it to 25. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. My hot take, and I've been saying it the entire draft process, Jackson Dart is going round 1, and I think he goes in the teens and a team trades up for him. I really think Dart is a round 1 quarterback in this year's class. I don't think he makes it to 25. Jalen Walker, Will Johnson to round out the list. Obviously, we always see guys, slip down the draft boards, guys who weren't supposed to be there. We look at last year, Cooper DeJean was, a lot of people regarded him as a round 1 talent, didn't go in round 1. So there are exceptions, but on my list today, those 15 guys, I just don't see them making it to pick 25. Probably with some other guys on my list, you'll say the same exact thing. But I want to know from you before I get into my list, who impressed you the most at the NFL Combine? If you watched any part of it, if you saw clips online on Twitter, let me know. Who stood out to you? Who jumped off the page? Because coming up in just a moment, I'm going to give you my top 20 prospects the Texans could take at pick 25. Now, first up, Walter Nolan. He's somebody who I told you guys, you're going to see some names on here and you're going to be like, no way Walter Nolan falls to pick 25. And necessarily, I don't disagree with you. I think Walter Nolan is a really good prospect at the defensive tackle spot, and I could easily see him going in the teens. I could also see him sliding down maybe into the 20s, maybe one of those first couple picks. Maybe the Texans trade up a couple slots to get a guy falling like a Walter Nolan. Really good interior defensive lineman. The Texans have a couple free agents at that position. I think it's a sneaky position the Texans could upgrade in round 1. Next up, he absolutely knocked it out of the park. Jihaad Campbell, linebacker from Alabama, and we know DeMeco Ryans loves those linebackers from Alabama. We got 2 of them on our roster right now. I think Jihaad Campbell also goes before the Texans pick at pick 25 because he absolutely showed up at the Combine. His RAS scores out of this world. 4.52, 40, 6'2". He also had an amazing broad jump. I also think Jihaad Campbell could be rising up draft boards because similar to other off-ball linebackers, he did some edge work at the Combine and looked really good. So I think he's very intriguing to teams, being like, he could be an off-ball linebacker, but you could also maybe fill him in as an edge rusher in passing situations. Next up, and this might be the player that, divides Texans fans the most. It's Tyler Booker, guard from Alabama. Now, depending on where you sit on Tyler Booker, you're either already in or you're already out on him. But the Combine didn't do this Alabama offensive lineman any help. He absolutely stunk it up at the NFL Combine, and it has a lot of Texans fans worrying about him possibly being the pick at 25. We all know DeMeco Ryans loves Alabama prospects, but as we look at his RAS score from the Combine, his relative athletic score, a 4.15 out of 10. Not good in the 40-yard dash. His explosion grades in the vertical and the broad jump, not good. Wasn't really good in the agility drills either, in the shuttle or the 3-cone. He has decent height and weight for a guard in the NFL, but it's making a lot of Texans fans worried because how bad Kenyon Green's RAS score was whenever he was testing at the NFL Combine. Obviously, the Texans spent a top 15 pick on Kenyon Green, and it hasn't worked out. So Tyler Booker, a lot of Texans fans are on the fence about this Alabama prospect. I want to know from you folks at home, be real with me. Are you in or out on Tyler Booker at pick 25? His testing at the Combine didn't really do him much favors. I think his interviews, the Texans absolutely love him. Let me know your thoughts, though, down in the comments section. Next up, Luther Burden III. And, a lot of people have been saying, I don't know if he makes it to pick 25. Now, I'm hearing rumors that he might not even be a first-round wide receiver. A lot of people are split as well on Luther Burden III. 61 receptions, 676 yards, and 6 touchdowns this past season for Mizzou. And he had a much better 2023 than he did in 2024. He's one of those prospects where coming into the college football season this past year, people were like, Luther Burden's probably a top 15 pick. And that sort of carried over a little bit to this offseason where he's eligible for the draft, but at the same time, did not have that same year. And a lot of people see him in his size as more of a, gadget wide receiver, as like a Percy Harvin, Tavon Austin guy who you're going to try to, mix and match in all these different situations to where he's a, running those jet sweeps, running those plays behind the line of scrimmage. I don't know if he fits exactly what the Texans want at pick 25, but he's an amazing talent. Great athleticism. I wouldn't be mad at the pick at Luther Burden III. I think the likelihood of him being there at pick 25 is becoming more and more likely as the days go on. Another guy who absolutely crushed the Combine, Shemar Stewart, defensive lineman from Texas A&M. And this is an interesting prospect in my opinion because when you look at the stats from College Station for Stewart, nothing really jumps off the page. 2024, 31 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble. But a lot of people are looking at him and his RAS score and saying, dude, who he reminds me of, at least on paper, is Myles Garrett. The size, the weight, the explosion, and speed all kind of mirror that of Myles Garrett for the Cleveland Browns. He is a very interesting prospect, a 9.99 on the RAS score. That means dude's an athletic freak. So a lot of teams could possibly see him as a guy who you take in round 1 and you can mold and shape into this awesome edge rusher, pass rusher, defensive lineman. I could see him possibly being there at pick 25 for the Houston Texans. Next up, Mykel Williams, defensive lineman from Georgia. He's another guy, we know Nick Caserio, DeMeco Ryans, love big school guys, SEC guys, especially those Georgia and Alabama prospects because they feel like they come from a line of winning. Mykel Williams, another one of those blue chip defensive line prospects from Georgia. There's about 3 or 4 of those guys in this draft. It's really hard for me to pick which one of these guys are going top 20, which one of them aren't, but I think they're all worth consideration in round 1. Speaking of Georgia guys, somebody who really showed out, and this name might surprise a lot of people because he was not considered to be a round 1 guy, and I still don't think he's a round 1 guy. I think he's more of a round 2 guy. But Jared Wilson made his case for being the best center in this draft class, maybe the second best center. We'll get to who I think is going to be the best center in this draft class later on in the show. But he absolutely put on a clinic at the Combine, and from a blue chip program in Georgia, he had a 9.98 RAS score. 6'3", 310, really good speed, really good explosion from the center from Georgia. And also, he's not the only Georgia Bulldog that showed out. We had Mykel Williams, Jared Wilson, also Tate Ratledge. Georgia Bulldogs were everywhere in Indianapolis this past week. And Ratledge was one of those guys who also stood out to me, was one of the leaders, I feel like, in that offensive line group. Whenever I was watching the coverage on Sunday, our chat sports team did some amazing coverage out there in Indy as well. He was one of the guys who was, first up in line every time, was one of the guys who were like, hey, how are we going to do this drill? Okay, Tate, go in and show him how we're going to do it. He was one of those leaders at the Combine. And also, not only you saw the leadership and people saying that he interviewed really well, and I'm not saying the RAS score is an end-all, be-all, or if you have a higher RAS score, you're going to be the best player in the draft. But it is a good indication of how ready you are to step in athletically at the next level. And a 9.97, he's showing himself to be one of the top guard prospects in this year's draft. Now, another guy, just like Jared Wilson before him, I don't think he goes in round 1, but somebody to consider if the Texans are going to reach for an offensive lineman. Next up, we're talking about crushing the draft. I think Shemar Stewart and Nick Emmanwori are two guys who maybe gained the absolute most from Indianapolis this past week. Nick Emmanwori, everybody knew he was an athletic freak. Awesome production at South Carolina. 88 tackles, 4 interceptions, 2 pass breakups this past year. And the judge from Sweden gives it a 10. A 10 out of 10 on the RAS score for Nick Emmanwori. I mean, dude was built in a freaking lab. 6'3", 220 pounds, a vert of 43. 43. Dude's dunking in the NBA. A broad jump of, 11 point, what is that, 06? And it's 40. A 4.40 at that speed and size and athleticism and strength in a safety. Woo! I don't like to give comparisons for guys who are like Hall of Famers or all-time greats, but the name Cam Chancellor just comes up when you think of a guy like Nick Emmanwori, somebody who is going to bring the boom, is athletic, and a just absolute freak on the back end, and he's going to make somebody's secondary very scary this upcoming season. Next up, somebody who I've been hearing a mixed bag from Kenneth Grant as well, of people saying, oh no, I don't think he makes it past the top 20 picks, and other people thinking, oh, he's a late day 1 guy, end of round 1 guy. If he's there at pick 25 for the Houston Texans, very intriguing option, is a mammoth of a human, 6'3", 339 pounds, and is very athletic as well. Didn't really go through a lot of the combine testing, but another guy, if he's there at pick 25, a big school guy in Michigan, DeMeco and Nick Caserio love the big school guys. Kenneth Grant could be an option for the Texans if they're looking to beef up the defensive line and not bring back some of those free agents they have this offseason. Now, my top 10 prospects for the Texans to look at in round 1. Before I do, today's show is brought to you by Factor. If you're trying to get in good shape and make sure you're getting well fed, hey, Factor meals, they got you covered. Ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. Lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks with Factor Keto meals based on a randomized controlled clinical trial with Factor Keto. Results will vary depending on diet and exercise, but also they have 40 options across 8 different dietary preferences on the menu each week. It's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. Choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Factor can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons. Reach your goals this year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FactorPodcast. Get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FactorPodcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Eat well, eat right. Do it with our friends over at Factor. Now, my top 10 guys, and this one might become a surprise because he's not getting a lot of buzz, especially because he was injured in 2024, didn't really participate at the NFL Combine. But Josh Simmons, offensive lineman from Iowa State, is somebody that you have to keep an eye on. Somebody who I trust well in the draft community says if he wasn't injured, he would be the number 1 tackle off the board in this year's draft. Now, do teams take that into consideration? Do they take, his upside and what he can become? Because he didn't really play in 2024, had the injury, and we haven't seen him in this offseason process. But some encouraging reports from Ian Rappaport, who absolutely got bodied by Jordan Schultz this past week. But hey, making it up for it with this tweet right here, Ian. From our combine coverage, Ohio State offensive tackle Josh Simmons had very positive medical evaluations in Indianapolis and is healing well. Sources say he is a first-round pick despite the injury. If he's there in pick 25 or in the 20s, he's somebody who I think the Texans could go and possibly get the steal of the draft in Josh Simmons if he's available. Now, obviously you have kind of your tackles. I'm not going to say set. You have Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, and then you have either Titus Howard or Blake Fisher at right tackle. But you can't overthink it. If Josh Simmons is on the board, you take the best player on the board at the offensive line spot, and you shuffle and mismatch however you need up front with the front five. But I think he's that good that you don't really care about the position. You go ahead and get a guy like Josh Simmons. Next up, somebody who could be sliding, also could be a top 20 pick, Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive lineman from Texas. Now, a lot of people, and Mel Kiper actually said this in his latest mock draft, that he had the Texans taking Kelvin Banks Jr., and they were worried about his size. They're saying, is he more closer to, the shorter end of 6'4", or is he actually 6'5"? He was excellent for the University of Texas this past season. And actually, at the Combine, ended up weighing in at 315 pounds and was 6'5" and 1/10 right there. RAS score of 8.3. I think he is a really good offensive line prospect as well. If him or Josh Simmons are there at pick 25, I don't know if they make it all the way to the Texans there, because offensive linemen, usually a popular pick in round 1 of the NFL draft, so I could easily see both these guys going in the teens. But if one of them's there at pick 25, I would love that pick for the Houston Texans. Another guy that seems to be slipping a little bit, right? We said Nick Emmanwori had an amazing combine. Malaki Starks, not so much. He had an okay combine, but at the end of the day, the combine isn't the end-all, be-all. And when you look at the tape for Malaki Starks, he is a baller. And there's a really good chance that he makes it to pick 25 for the Houston Texans. I mean, we look at his RAS scores, 5.5, not great in the height and weight category. The speed is there, a 4.5 speed. A little worrying, he didn't do well in the agility drills. He didn't do that well, but still, somebody, when you put on the tape, a big school guy, a Georgia guy, I think he is going to be in consideration for that pick 25 if he's there on the board. Another person which I've been kind of team, don't take a tight end in round 1 just because you have so many on the roster right now, and you drafted one last year in Cade Stover. You still have Dalton Schultz, but Colston Loveland is somebody who a lot of teams are intrigued at. 2024, just like all of the Michigan Wolverine offense, didn't have his best season. But you turn back to his 2023 tape, he's a tweener. He's one of those guys who plays the tight end position, but is almost as good, if not better, than a lot of the receivers in this year's draft. Colston Loveland, obviously we know Nick Caley is a tight end guy. As I said earlier in the show, I don't think Tyler Warren even sniffs outside the top 10 picks, but if he falls to 25, maybe Nick Caley has some sort of sway and says, hey, he's the top guy on my draft board. Let's go out and get Loveland from Michigan. Next one might be a little bit of a reach, but I'm using my sources and, kind of context clues. When there's smoke, there's fire, as my friend Mitchell Renz always likes to say. Darius Alexander, defensive tackle from Toledo. And the thing with this is the Texans, they added to their coaching staff this past season, right? Frank Oakham is working with the defensive line. Where was he before? He was working with the defensive line at Toledo. And Darius Alexander, his numbers absolutely popped at the Combine. A 9.2 RAS score. For his size, his agility, his speed is off the charts. Now, he's a little bit older, which might ding him. I believe he's 25 years old right now. But, look at, all those measurables. His size and speed, combination is there. I think he could be a really intriguing option for the Houston Texans at pick 25. I have my top 5 guys in just a moment, but here's some guys that I think just missed the list for me. I think you could easily put them on the list, or maybe I'm dumb and maybe they go before the Texans even pick at pick 25. But Omarion Hampton, a lot of people view him as the second best running back in this draft. I don't see the Texans going running back in round 1. I would be shocked if they did. Maxwell Harrison had a great combine, fastest cornerback out there. I don't know if the Texans go corner in round 1. Xavier Watts, another really good defensive back when you put on the tape. James Pierce Jr. has some off-the-field concerns. I could see him slipping, but another really good edge rusher. Derek Harmon, a good defensive lineman from Oregon. Same with Mike Green, who he's been climbing a lot of draft boards, but another small school guy from Marshall. I could easily see him go in the teens and be off the board before the Texans even pick. This next one, a little bit of a reach. Maybe these next two, a little bit of a reach for Jaden Higgins or Josh Connerly Jr. They're at pick 25, but Higgins had an insane combine as well. His size and speed and production at Iowa State could garner some end of round one hype. And Josh Connolly, obviously, the league needs more offensive linemen, so he's another guy who could be very end of round one guys that you take a look at. Now, this next guy, I was battling putting him on the list because I truly think he cemented himself as a top 15 pick, but you never know. Matthew Golden from the University of Texas. And honestly, with his production at Texas this past year, his tape, his route running ability, and then he goes at the combine, and it's incomplete because he didn't do all the drills, but an unofficial 4.29 40-yard dash with everything that he's had, and then he goes out and runs in the 4.2s. Yeah, I think a lot of teams in the top 20 are going to be looking at him as possibly the second best wide receiver behind Teteroa McMillan. Hell, a couple draft experts actually this week after the combine said Golden is their number one wide receiver in this year's draft. Now, do a lot of teams have him as their number one wide receiver? I don't believe so. I still believe T-Mac is probably everybody's number one. But Matthew Golden turning a lot of heads at the combine. If he's there at pick 25, I think the Texans run up to the podium and send that pick in. Another guy who impressed mightily, and maybe just he's one of my draft crushes that I've really, really fallen in love with, is Jonah Savaiinaea from the University of Arizona, offensive lineman. I mean, just watching the offensive line drills, he really stood out to me. He's so fluid for his size. His ability to move around, I mean, his speed grade is elite, and I'm upset he didn't do the agility testing because I really think that RAS score would be even higher if he did do the agility testing. Just his ability to stop and move, he's going to be a great pulling guard in the NFL. I'll say that. Jonah Savaiinaea from the University of Arizona, he really, really impressed me at the combine, especially with the on-field drills that the offensive lineman did. Next up, Donovan Jackson. And these top three guys, I truly believe these top three guys are my top three options as of right now for the Texans to take in round one at pick 25. Donovan Jackson obviously played with C.J. Stroud at Ohio State, and he has that position flexibility. Played every single position across the offensive line, from tackle all the way to center. He is a tough football player, and he has that mentality, that grit, that I think DeMeco Ryans absolutely loves in his prospects. We saw Kamari Lassiter. You know, a lot of people were down on him last year. A lot of people, whenever the Texans picked Kamari Lassiter, were like, really, you're going to take a guy who ran in the 4.5s in the 40-yard dash? But Lassiter has that dog mentality, and I think Donovan Jackson has that mentality as well. He is an absolute dog. Played in the Big Ten, went up against some of the best defensive lines, best pass rushers in all of college football, and held his ground pretty well. I think you take him and you can plug and play him in multiple spots along your offensive line. I think the Texans do so at guard for Donovan Jackson, but a really, really good prospect that you'll have to keep an eye out on, especially with that Ohio State connection. Next up, this might be me going out on a limb with another draft crush. Dude, great Zabel. Absolutely crushed it in the NFL Combine. He looked amazing. And not only that, but you look at all the stories from Senior Bowl down in Mobile, Alabama. And this was one of the biggest things that I took from looking at it is Zabel was called out multiple times, back to back at the Senior Bowl. All the defensive linemen, they wanted them a piece of Zabel. And from all reports, he basically whooped up on every single defensive lineman at the Senior Bowl. He held his ground. He looked awesome. His testing was really good. I mean, especially on the field drills that the offensive line did. Just like I said about Jonah Savaiinaea, he looked really fluid. His hips looked really good. He looked like he moved really well and gives you that position flexibility, just like I said with Donovan Jackson. He can play center, maybe the best center in the entire NFL draft. I said, Wilson out of Georgia might be the second best. He is for sure the best center in this year's draft, but you can also play him at guard if you need. I think if you're looking at interior offensive linemen, if some of these weapons that you really like a Matthew Golden, are already off the board, I would love Zabel at pick 25. And my number one choice for the Texans at pick 25, Emeka Egbuka. And I think it really helps the Texans that Matthew Golden is getting all this hype and getting all this press to go in the top 20 because it's another wide receiver off the board where Emeka could maybe slide you at pick 25. A lot of people are saying, oh, maybe the Texans have to trade up to get Emeka Egbuka, C.J. Stroud's friend from Ohio State. But with some of these other guys rising, I still think Emeka is one of the best route runners in this entire NFL draft. And the chemistry that he has with Stroud will show up day one if the Texans draft him in round 1. I think if he's there at pick 25, depending on what the Texans do in free agency, he will be the pick for the Houston Texans if he's on the board whenever the Texans select in round 1 of the 2025 NFL draft. Now, there's my list. Let me know down in the comments section. Do you love it? Do you hate it? How dumb am I? I mean, really, let me know down in the comments section. I know there's going to be somebody who you're like, wow, I can't believe you have him as a round 1 guy. Or, Jeremy, how do you not have this guy as a possible round 1 choice? Go in the comments section. Let me know. I'll be looking at all the comments and maybe make a better list in the next couple weeks as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. You can always hit me up on Twitter at Jeremy Chuggs, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are chugging along and going into NFL free agency. We already have trade rumors that are flying. Debo was interested. Texans were not. There's probably more guys along the trade block that the Texans could look at along with free agency and the NFL draft. We'll cover it all here at Texans Today. A reason why you got to hit that subscribe button.